Thank you, Tom, and everyone on the call for giving me some of your time today. My name is Jenny Barker, and I am the Chief of Party for the Seafood Alliance for Legality and Traceability. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, so feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll address them at the end. And today I really am here to talk about SALT, or the Seafood Alliance for Legality and Traceability, which is an effort funded by USAID, the Walton Family, Packard, and Moore Foundations. And you really heard last week from David Shore in the first in this webinar series about the global dialogue and the release of their key data elements. And he really gave you a great synopsis of why traceability is important. Governments are requiring it, consumers are demanding it, and producers are realizing the importance of it. And that momentum and acknowledgement was precisely why SALT was developed, in order to bring together those diverse stakeholders to learn about traceability, to understand its value, to learn from each other's experience, and then potentially to find partners and places where collaboration can happen. Before I go too deeply into SALT, though, I want to share a little bit about Fishwise, which is the organization I work for that leads this effort. Fishwise has been working for nearly 2 decades. First, we started by engaging with partners in the seafood industry to achieve some of the most ambitious responsible seafood commitments. One of the other ways that we work is we try to spark learning and innovation by participating in these multi-stakeholder collaborations. And we want to create new strategies for sustainability and combating human rights abuses in seafood supply chains. And then finally, we do original research and try and create some novel approaches, tools, and learning platforms to empower the whole field of seafood to move forward to improve the way it operates globally. We do have a strong touch point in global supply chains, and in particular, we work with retailers, including Albertsons companies and Target. We also work with hospitality industry, including the Venetian Hotel, and we have worked with Iberostar. And so we think it's really important to do a lot of this work when it comes to seafood. Apologies for that. So part of how we do engage is through a due diligence framework, and that these 7 steps are based on the Conservation Alliance's common vision for seafood, and it's been based on and with support from many environmental NGOs in the seafood space, and then also social responsibility experts and human rights experts have vetted this as a really appropriate way for seafood supply chains to engage in due diligence work to understand better what is happening in their supply chain. We may be able to get someone from Fishwise to come and do more of a presentation if it would be of interest to this group about the due diligence work we do with industry. But as you can see, part of it is also communicating about the best practices and what your expectations are in supply chains, and then publicly reporting out. And as just an example, this is publicly available information, but this is Albertsons Company's due diligence progress report, which takes into account traceability, counter IUU, fishing, and social responsibility activities overall. But now back to SALT, because that's actually the initiative I'm leading, and I can speak with some authority and expertise on this one. So SALT really is here to serve a global community and enhance their understanding and collaboration around traceability. And part of how we did that was by going out and asking globally what people needed in order to better be able to promote transparency in their supply chains and traceability. So we held 4 events globally. We engaged 187 organizations, and overall we've been able to reach 56 countries with SALT. And so for us, that was really important to understanding what the people's needs were. And really what we heard was that there's been no one to sort of be a central convener that can pull all of these ideas and stitch the stakeholders and activities together for a comprehensive understanding of what's happening globally. And so SALT developed a website, which is meant to be a one-stop shop for companies, NGOs, and governments to find best practices, case studies, and other things like that. SALT is a 5-year contract for now, and so we have started year 3. We're about halfway through, but continue to be a resource well into the future. SALT's objectives are listed here on the slide, and includes expanding accessible, interoperable, and electronic catch documentation and traceability. So when I say ECDT, that's what I'm referencing. And in particular, we know it's important for this data to be electronic, so it can be transferred along the supply chain faster and be used for better and used for different purposes. We also want to increase the capacity of seafood producing countries to adopt such systems. We want to incentivize the seafood industry to adopt the systems. And then we also want to see how this transparency and this electronic traceability could be used to support human and labor rights. We think it's really important to see if there is a system out there that can identify where illegal fishing or illegal product is happening. A lot of times that means you can identify other illegal behaviors happening. And so the more light we shed on these supply chains, the better likely, the more likely we are to be able to stamp out some issues when it comes to social responsibility. And I call out here in particular seafood producing countries, which for us are obviously the countries where the product is coming from, often in the developing world. But also then a key audience for us is seafood industry, which is why we're so glad to be talking to you here today. So who have we been able to engage when it comes to industry? We've had just over 30 different groups, and this includes both the technology industry, but obviously the seafood industry. And we think that it's really important for them both to be at the table together to better understand. So the technology firms can better understand what industry needs, but then industry can also share and the technology firms can also share with industry what some of the global standards are in order to help them through the process. We think it's really important to have both of those stakeholders at the table together. And so I want to take a little bit of a moment here to talk about what and why we said comprehensive electronic catch documentation and traceability, what we mean. So the electronic catch documentation and traceability really refers to electronic capture of the catch data itself, and then the electronic transfer of that information throughout the supply chain to support overall product traceability. And when it comes to comprehensive, really, this for us means that the catch data and traceability should be used to support social, environmental, and economic well-being. In particular, obviously from an economic side, there's an element of regulatory compliance that you need to do, but it's also risk mitigation against illegal supply in seafood supply chains. You know, we know that illegally caught fish can be mixed with legally caught fish at many points along the seafood supply chain. And that unlawful fishing is often associated with other criminal activities. So increasing traceability in seafood supply chains can necessarily expose where illegal fishing is happening and prevent it from being sold on a global market. But you can also, you know, better assess the risk of the behavior in these supply chains and figure out ways to support workers in their grievance mechanisms. But then finally, we also want to make sure that the really important data that's being collected here is better used for fisheries management globally. If the resource isn't abundant, and if the resource isn't managed properly, we all know, then that obviously is disruptive to supply chain. So how can you use the data to feed that back into the producer country governments in order to have better environmental impact? So what does that mean for you? And what does that mean SALT is actually doing? We really settled on two major themes when it comes to what is needed around electronic catch documentation and traceability and comprehensive. The first is incentivizing it. We have to understand how we convince or share the appropriate information with people in order to help them be able to more effectively do traceability, and that means understanding what barriers to entry there are and how do you address those. What is the return on investment? The other one is then once you understand the value of traceability, what are the guiding principles you should use to implement traceability? And so for us, you know, we sort of look at creating things like those new products, which were the website, this idea of these principles, then we curate existing information, right? We want to make sure that we are gathering and pulling out those really important pieces that may be on page 60 of a report and feature it because it wasn't getting acknowledged the way it should. And then we also go to the field and learn what's happening. What's been successful in Thailand and could it work somewhere else? What's been successful in Indonesia, does that work in Belize? We really think it's important to capture the learning from the people who are doing it on the ground. And so within those two big buckets that I talked about, the incentivizing comprehensive ECDT and the principles, you can see a whole set of activities that we're going to be doing here. I'd like to call your attention though, in particular to the piece on the comprehensive principles that we're developing. And I want to do that because we have a consultative committee for that we're engaging. Currently, there are about 34 members in that committee, more than 20 countries. And different governments from Senegal to Chile to Indonesia are participating. They've only had one meeting. It's about a 1-hour commitment quarterly. And really, we just want people's input who are both implementing and trying to do traceability. So some people are early in the process and learning, but willing to kind of contribute their time and experience, to those who have done it successfully and are willing to share those broader lessons with us. So if you're interested in joining that committee, we would certainly welcome your participation. I want to turn to a few resources I think might be particularly useful for you to focus on as part of, as you start to explore the SALT website. The SALT Seascape, which is featured here, it's an interactive map. If you scroll over, you'll see a list come up that you see on here. It says Southeast Asia. There are 108 total efforts, segmented by the types of kind of traceability versus social responsibility work. And really this allows you, say you're sourcing from Chile or you're sourcing from Thailand, you can go in and see that obviously the Seafood Task Force is doing a lot of work in Thailand around traceability and work happening there. But who are the other partners? Who are maybe NGOs who could help you? Ocean Mind is working with the government of Thailand there. Might they be a resource for you? And so it allows you to see who else is working in that space and potentially identify partners to help in your traceability journey. The other thing that we think is, I wanted to call your attention to is a few of the tools and other resources we have on the site. For tools, there's the Calculating Return on Investment, which is a tool Futurefish created a few years ago. There's FAO guidance on national seafood traceability systems. I also want to call your attention to a really important tool that Fishwise developed in partnership with the Walmart Foundation called RISE. It's the Roadmap for Improving Seafood Ethics, and it's actually targeted at industry to walk you through how you incorporate social responsibility into your due diligence frameworks and how to help address illegal activity in your supply chain. But in particular, some of the things that we do with SALT are to pull out, relevant information. The graphic on the left is a really interesting piece to kind of show what the basics are for how seafood traceability happens. Or the piece in the middle is actually an original piece we did as part of SALT. We heard from industry, we read the relevant materials and said, maybe we can, in a couple of pages, create a synopsis for where do you start when it comes to full train traceability. If you're just trying to get into the traceability space, what are the ways that you can do that in a more kind of concise set of information. But then the third piece is a brand new report for those who may be even farther along in their traceability journey, where they have a good system in place, but now they really need to understand what key data elements they need to collect for which markets that they're entering, which are overlapping. And so we also want to feature those resources on our website as well. Here's another example of some of the work we're doing when we're looking at the barriers to doing traceability, everything from return on investment to regulatory issues to technology. We'll be doing small reports on our website on each of these issues that we found to help people understand how to best address and overcome some of the challenges that they've been encountering when it comes to traceability. Finally, I want to just share a little bit about what SALT is, who we are, what we mean. The SALT community is broad. Like I said, 56 countries globally. We've engaged a ton of stakeholders, and a lot of people obviously use our website. They email us with questions. They can potentially attend an event of ours, but they are all part of the SALT community, because it takes obviously all of us to create change in such a massive global seafood supply chain. But then there are those who have decided to engage more strategically with SALT and to participate a little bit more heavily, and they're the ones we're kind of calling the SALT Coalition, and you can see them listed here. There are more than 30 groups right now, and part of that is we have an advisory committee which represents industry, NGOs, and governments, because we want to make sure SALT is always keeping in touch with what the needs of the broader community is. I mentioned the Consultative Committee on Principles, where we have a lot of government engagement there. We are also trying to create these spaces where, we know that some important work is happening in South Africa, and maybe we could, there was an ICT for Fisheries conference there that hosted by Abelobi, which is an ECDT company. They're working with local fishers. We brought someone from Belize who was working with local fishers there to do a little bit of a learning exchange and share their experiences. So there are lots of different ways where, a smaller NGO in Indonesia comes to some of our events and then models them in the local context in order to improve the capacity of fishers. So there are different ways that we're engaging on the ground and at a higher level, but we really think that these types of engagement are important for moving the needle on traceability globally. So how do you get involved? I kind of spoke to you a little bit about participating in events, telling us about your experiences and telling us your stories. But really, SALT is here to be a resource for you. So visit the website, feel free to email us if you have questions, and we'd be happy to sort of direct you to the right resources. If you want to be more engaged, please let us know. We'd be happy to maybe do a quick interview to understand more about what your experience is when it comes to traceability, or you can participate in our committees. We'll be in Boston at the North American Seafood Expo. We'd be happy to see you there. We're not sure if we're going to Brussels yet, but any opportunity we can have just to meet face to face and have a talk, we're happy to do that and learn more about your work and what you're striving to do. So just again, quickly, you can email salt@fishwise.org, or you can email me directly, j.barker@fishwise.org. And just thank you so much for your time today, and please don't be shy. Feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do as you, continue on your traceability journey. We're really happy to help and hope to be able to serve you well. Thanks again, Tom. And I really look forward to staying engaged with the Global Tuna Alliance as your important work continues. Thanks so much.